They probably would have diminished that feather coating. They may not have lost them completely, so even an adult T-Rex may have had amusing tufts of feathers or flashes of color on the head or down the side of the body or along the middle of the back, perhaps just for visual display and not any longer for any kind of temperature control.
It's a tactic still used by today's biggest birds.
We see that even in ostriches, when the chicks hatch, that they're completely covered with fluff. But then as the animals get bigger and bigger and bigger, they lose all the feathers on their neck, they lose a lot of the feathers on their legs, and also their feather density on the body itself becomes much more limited.
For T-Rex and the meat eaters, the similarities to the warm-blooded ostrich don't end there. Other fossilized remains are revealing some other very bird-like and surprisingly endearing behaviors. When this lizard-looking relative of T-Rex was unearthed over a clutch of eggs in 1924, it was named Oviraptor, Latin for egg thief, because scientists thought it had been pilfering another dinosaur's eggs when it died.
Oviraptor was thought to be originally eating the eggs because it was a scaly reptile, and that's kind of low-life business that reptiles are in, right?
But 70 years later, another Oviraptor find by Mark Norell led to a very different conclusion.
We found dinosaurs sitting on top of their nests. To find an animal brooding its eggs is a remarkable thing. Like, I mean, if you would have told me that we would find that a few years before, I would have said you were crazy.
Like warm-blooded birds, the Oviraptors were protecting their own eggs, not eating someone else's. Even more shocking, some scientists believe many of the nest sitters were male, and that males played an important role in brooding and raising the young, just like ostriches. And possibly T-Rex as well, since it was a close cousin of Oviraptor.
It's very likely that if we make a prediction about the parental care of Tyrannosaurus rex, we would predict that it was the dad at the nest. So here's the most ferocious predator of any human fantasy, and it turns out that they were probably good dads.
Poor T-Rex is becoming more bird-like every day. His fearsome reputation as a lizard-like, cold-blooded killer is being shattered by images of fuzzy babies, flamboyant patches of feathers, and stay-at-home dads. Even his posture has changed, as scientists have been forced to account for his more avian bone structure. Sadly, things will only get worse for T-Rex as startling new information about the feathered dinos comes to light. New dinosaur color revelations are emerging from New Haven, where the Yale team is starting to make some real progress on the hues of Anchiornis' coat. Jakob has finally isolated two distinct types of the color-carrying melanosomes. Sausage shapes, which would have held a black color, and meatball shapes, which would have contained a reddish brown, what birdwatchers call rufous red. It's a big day for paleontology. 160 million years after Anchiornis was fossilized, the team has discovered the first physical pieces in the jigsaw puzzle of its color. Jakob has proven that dinosaur colors can be resurrected. But the news isn't all good. The colors he's isolated are only from a few spots on Anchiornis' body, and he's run out of samples to test. Fortunately, Li Chuanguo, their colleague from the Museum of Natural History in Beijing, comes to the rescue once again. While in New York for other business, Li brings additional samples collected from Anchiornis.
See the samples there? Okay.
Jakob now has what he needs for a full-body exam. This time, the results from the electron microscope come quickly. He finds more of the sausage and meatball shapes, but also many other variations that he doesn't recognize. Serendipitously, one of the world's leading melanosome specialists has just spent some time at Yale.
Hey, man. Hey, how's it going? Come, man. Good to see you.
A perfect opportunity for a color consultation.
I actually got a kind of cryptic email from Jakob just asking me about this certain shape of melanosome. After a few more emails, he wound up telling me that he had this great fossil specimen and that they wanted to reconstruct the color. And I was, to be honest, a bit jealous that I hadn't thought of it.
Zebrafish has basically...
Intrigued, Matt quickly jumps in to help. He's an expert on color and feathers, which often go together in complex ways.
They're very narrow as well.
They're very narrow.
Brilliant greens and blues and shimmery iridescence are produced by light bouncing off the physical structures of the feather. And most bright reds, yellows, and pinks make their way into feathers from foods the birds eat. The colors stored in melanosomes tend to be the more earthy tones, so Matt focuses his attention on those. Using his one-of-a-kind database of melanosomes and their corresponding colors, he confirms the black and reddish brown and begins to decipher the other shapes Jakob has found.
There's actually this gradient. We found this intermediate between the sausage and the meatball. And then that appeared to be associated with a gray color.
As Matt spits out colors, Jakob begins mapping where they belong.
That was like the Cretaceous feather that we looked at, the striped feather.
It's a crude paint by numbers of the ancient fossil. But it's beginning to reveal amazing patterns of color, including speckles on the cheeks, stripes on the arm feathers, spots on the legs, and the biggest surprise of all, a truly debonair hairpiece.
We found support for black, gray, brown, brownish red. But what I think's more exciting to me is that these were patterns. Like, we could find out that the rufous color, the reddish color, was on the head.
And that's interesting because that says that it was actually using these feathers for display. It was showing off its feathers to its fellows.
If Anchiornis was showing off for his neighbors, it means they must have been able to see what he was displaying. Turns out, we think they could. Without ever looking a dinosaur in the eye, scientists have made some interesting deductions about what the creatures saw. Their evidence comes from vision tests on modern crocs and birds. Many croc species have a proven ability to recognize colors. And birds have very keen color vision as well. They share the same 4 color receptors in their eyes. So, genetically, scientists can predict that those receptors were present in their ancient common ancestor. That common ancestor is also shared by dinosaurs. So scientists can infer that dinos evolved with color vision as well. If they're right, it means Anchiornis' companions would have been duly impressed by his conspicuous rufous red crest. Feathers may have evolved for temperature control, but other, more visual uses would soon have followed. Dominance displays, mating games, camouflage, probably all of the above. And if the team's color work pans out, the colors and patterns of Anchiornis and the other feathered dinos will reveal just how they did it. But just as they begin the final stage of the recolorization, another find uproots the dinosaur family tree yet again. In an obscure mining town in Shandong Province, China, an intriguing new dino is making the origins of dino feathers even fuzzier than it was before. For years, it sat unexamined in a private collection until its owner turned it over to a museum. Mark Norell can't wait to take a look.
How are you? Great, really great.
Well, let me introduce you to the director.
Yeah, can't wait to see it.
The new find is Tianyalong, a small bipedal dinosaur covered in primitive bristle-like filaments. The first specimen reveals long bristles on the throat, along the backbone, and at the base of the tail.
We were able to see additional specimens and to see that these bristles are completely covering the entire body. I mean, that was pretty amazing and pretty spectacular because I never expected that they would be, that thick and that, covering the whole head, the whole neck, everything. I mean, it looked like a big fuzzball.
Interesting. But given the huge number of feathered, fuzzy, and filamented dinosaurs that have been found, it doesn't seem like much of a revelation. Until paleontologists realize where it stands in the dino family tree. Unlike every other feathered dino, Tianyalong doesn't come from the predatory line that includes T-Rex and the flesh eaters. It comes from an older plant-eating branch that featured the armor-plated, spiked, and duck-billed species, including the iconically bizarre Stegosaurus and Triceratops. If Tianyalong's bristles do turn out to be actual feathers, it would suggest that the ancestor it shared with the feathered meat-eaters might also have had some form of feathers. Way back at the base of the dinosaur family tree. And maybe even further. because new research on modern crocs is revealing that buried in their DNA, they too have the building blocks for the proteins that make up feathers. Building blocks they could have gotten from their even older common ancestor with dinosaurs and birds. It's a stunning new window into the earliest days of the dinosaur, and indicates to a growing number of scientists that all dinosaurs may have had some form of feathers. Unfortunately, it doesn't shed much light on the way those feathers looked on a living, breathing animal. Little Anchiornis is still the great hope for that. And after all the fossil hunting, sample taking, sausage searching, and color coding, he is at last getting ready for his close-up. The team at Yale calls in world-renowned bird artist Michael DiGiorgio to bring him to life.
I got a phone call from Rick. He says, I have a really cool project for you. And I said, sure, sounds good, what is it? And I thought it was some type of project with a bird. And then he told me that it was a dinosaur.
This is uncharted territory. Since use often defines appearance, DiGiorgio will rely on Rick's knowledge of bird feathers and their functions to hint at what some of the dino feathers might actually have looked like. The thick body feathers, most likely for warmth.
This is from a great gray owl, a northern forest Arctic owl that lives in places that are really cold. And so underneath the contour feathers of the plumage, he has a whole layer of downy feathers that provide beautiful insulation.
The red crest, probably for display.
Now, this is an example of a male great curassow. These feathers are a little stiffer and slightly curly, a little more specialized than we would see in Anchiornis huxleyi, but still an example of a prominent crest on a living bird, and probably functions in courtship display and signaling.
But the long, spangled arm and leg feathers are not as easy to decipher. And the foot feathers are still downright bizarre.
One of the biggest surprises was the foot, the way the feathers came off the foot, which is amazing. Why would feathers, it seems like they would get in the way, right?
The foot feathers are a mystery his drawing might help solve. And it's finally ready for the big color reveal. For the first time in more than 150 million years, a dinosaur will be seen in its original colorful coat.
And here is our rendering of the plumage of Anchiornis huxleyi. When we thought we had an opportunity to reconstruct the color of the dinosaurs, I never expected that the first one we would work on would turn out to be so dramatic.
Yeah, it looks like a big fluffy chicken with, you know, lots of leg feathers. So a very weird looking big fluffy chicken.
I could see it hunting down maybe insects, small prey. Probably was quite a quick creature based on the size of the legs. And if I had to pick a living bird that this looks the most like, it reminds me of a roadrunner.
Taken together, the feathers and colors provide some fascinating clues about how Anchiornis acted.
They might circle around each other and size each other up, and maybe it flares up its feathers to display these patterns. It might be a brief skirmish and then one of them runs away.
We know Anchiornis wasn't airborne because its feathers were not aerodynamic enough for flight. But they certainly looked like they were heading in that direction.
I'll be opening up a can of worms if I say it goes up in the trees and then flaps down. But you would think that maybe it would at least soften the landing if it jumped out of a tree.
It does have actual fingers, so it probably could climb very well. And I could see it sailing from one location to another.
This thing might have been useful in gliding, but if they did glide, they were certainly at a very early phase of aerodynamic function.
It's a theory worth further investigation. But another of the creature's more familiar features has bird expert Rick Prum pondering something bigger. The detailed patterning of its black and white feathers.
The spangled plumage of the wings and the legs is really exciting because it's strikingly similar to the feathers of a breed of chicken. The silver-spangled Hamburg chicken is a domesticated chicken that has beautifully white feathers with a black spangled tip. So it's a striking example of a very similar plumage pattern in a living bird.
The physical similarity sparks a powerful possibility.
One of the interesting things about the Hamburg chicken is that the spangles are larger in females than they are in males.
If the same was true of Anchiornis, a patterned comparison of additional specimens could help reveal which were males and which were females. Something notoriously difficult to determine from dinosaur fossils. It could work on other dinosaurs as well, if enough samples can be found and analyzed. Who would have thought a mere chicken might provide such a windfall? And unfortunately for the great T-Rex, that's not all the chicken can tell us. Scientists recently analyzed protein samples from a 68-million-year-old T-Rex leg bone. And what modern animal did they find it was most closely related to? That's right, the common chicken. Think about that next time you bite into a wing. After centuries at the sinister top of the reptilian predatory food chain, T-Rex can fall no further. From upright and scaly to feathered and bird-like, this cousin of Anchiornis and long-lost relative of the chicken has had its reputation completely shattered. His image consultants might pine for the days before new scientific techniques invaded the field of paleontology. But for the rest of us, it has opened up a whole new world. A world where one small creature named Anchiornis brought the past back to life. Where dinosaurs, crocs, and birds shared a single common ancestor. And where evolutionary trial and error left dinosaurs with an exotic collection of strange feathered coats and eerily familiar bird-like behaviors.